afternoon, Dee. Let me turn this off. There we go. Hey, how are you?
I'm well.
Have you been? Good afternoon, everybody else out there that's looking in on us. I see that Mr. Keith Hambley is there. So he's one of our guests, isn't he?
Okay.
More and more are going to be joining us as we go along. So I haven't made up any questions to ask, but I'm sure you have, Deanie.
Yeah, I've been on the phone for a lot of the morning.
Hey, look, there's the gentleman himself.
Okay, hi. I just wondered if I clicked the right button or not.
You did the right thing.
There we go. Well, that's always a first.
You know Deanie?
Pardon?
Have you ever met Deanie before? Deanie
No, first time. Hello.
Hello there. I'm sorry, your name's not displayed.
Oh, Keith Hambley, CEO at Fred Victor.
Oh, hello, Keith.
Hi.
Just saying, I've spent a lot of time last couple of hours looking at documents from the federal government on their homeless strategy and what they did with the 2.2 billion. And then I've talked to some people in the city, a woman named Zuna, who's with the shelter and housing area of Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to get all kinds of information, and I kind of came up with my conclusion, which is they haven't really dealt with the homeless problem in Toronto. Now that they've decided they have to deal with it, there's so many things to bring together, so many disparate groups that have been doing their thing.
That's right.
And because we need a national strategy, that all the money that came out of Ottawa, 2.2 billion, went to collecting information in great part.
Some of it, yeah.
Yeah, and streamlining it. So there's coordinated access and to align the whole process.
So, some of that, yes, absolutely. And there are so many participants, if you will. Those who are providing shelter, emergency shelter, providing housing, direct housing, and housing supports. There are a lot of us cats to be herding, that's for sure. And when you say $2 billion across the country, it sounds like a lot of money, but when you say across the country, it gets spread about fairly thinly.
Yeah, that was my first reaction. My God, $2.2 billion is a lot of money, but yeah. Because in the countries that I've looked at, Keith, that have actually are handling this, and I guess Finland and followed by Denmark have really done an excellent job, but it came from the top down. It's a national strategy. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the plan, steps 1 through 20.
Something like that. Yeah, there needs to be all orders of government working in lockstep with each other of how to basically not only provide the resources, but provide the coordination, the solutions, not to be overly simplistic about it, but the solution is housing, right?
Yes.
The development and the building and the creation, not only the creation of new units of housing, there's got to be new build for sure, but also how do you use the resources that currently exist in housing? So are we maximizing what we currently have in terms of housing units that may be vacant through Toronto Community Housing, other actually creative solutions to leverage housing units in a municipal environment?
That's a good point that I hadn't thought of and hadn't looked at. So obviously that's a big part of the problem. The other interesting thing that I discovered was on CAMH's website, where access to mental health is a over 2 year wait.
It's shocking. Yeah, when you need mental health support or even substance use support, it's a long wait. The access point, which is a coordinating entity that does assessment for folks who are in need of varying degrees of supportive housing or supportive services, there's unfortunately a goodly long time to wait, and oftentimes waiting on a wait list, which is not what we want, of course. And it's aligning it, and I think it's getting a little bit better, but it's aligning those funders that fund support services, which is primarily the province, along with federal government initiatives around how the bricks and mortar housing, municipal entities around bricks and mortar, and finding land or finding the resources to actually build it. So when you look at supportive housing, you need to have those things aligned well in terms of the timing.
I did not realize that it took, they said 2.5 years to get mental health help. Do we need a lot more psychologists? Do we need to hire a lot more people into that system?
I don't personally believe you need to hire more psychologists, although that's part of it. It's those who provide support services, case management, how to deal and cope with various things. And folks may have varying degrees of support or mental health support needs, to, all the way from a very high support where there's an expectation of 24-hour support services on site, or it could be just, I wouldn't say light support, but moderate support where a person can still live independently, but requires a little bit of a check-in or wellness checks every so often, or what have you. It may not be on-site support. So there's got to be a range, and there's got to be a variety of that. And I can't help but think that there's mental health support, but there's also I have to say, substance use support or harm reduction support that's required as well.
So that's better news, because it takes a long time to become a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but caseworkers we could hire if that's right. What's clogging the system.
Absolutely, and it's caseworkers, but also there's certainly a move, and has been for quite some time now, around hiring or bringing on board or utilizing the resource of people with lived experience, whether that's through mental health lived experience or being on the street. There's a vital and I think pivotal role that what we would call peers or people with lived experience in the success of a housing or health outcome for an individual. And that's part of the solution as well.
I was living out of this city. I moved back to Toronto just over 7 years ago. I was living about an hour and a half north for 15 years. And when I came back, I noticed that the homeless issue had gotten worse, and I started getting annoyed about it. And that's how I started getting involved. I ended up with Anthony Van Zandt, delivering bread in the middle of last winter to the shelters. And I have to tell you, ironically, and it's still, I got to smile when I say it, that the Better Living Center in the CNE grounds, wall-to-wall cots, I was gobsmacked.
Yeah.
Like most people, they don't realize how big this problem has become.
That's right. And I think people are seeing it, how big the problem is since COVID started, because you put in a disruptor like a pandemic, and it lays bare those social inequities that existed in society, if you will. It literally laid bare of who was literally on the street during a time when everybody was isolating at home, and a person who is homeless has a hard time isolating anywhere other than being isolated.
A couple of things I didn't realize, that there's the little bit that Norman did on the fellow Michael, who I knew actually. I've known Michael for a couple of years, who died in the bus shelter.
Yes.
And people in this whole neighborhood were appalled. But what they didn't realize is that this past winter, Michael lived in Farquhar's Lane, which runs between the Esplanade and Front Street. And there was an indent in the wall where there was a hot air fan. He spent all of last winter in there.
Yeah.
And yet, when people in the neighborhood were so appalled about him living in the shelter, I saw that as a good sign, but then that reflects back on people's problems with the homeless, which is they're afraid. Should I talk to them? Maybe I'll just ignore it. So maybe it's helped a little for people to actually figure out how they're going to deal with the problem, because public attitude's a really big issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And there may be that level of fatigue, if you will, of people seeing homelessness on the street or having seen it for quite some time. There's fatigue, unfortunately, the compassion fatigue that may exist in the general community. But for agencies like ourselves at Fred Victor or others, and particularly at the frontline staffing and the frontline management of these programs, whether it's a respite or a shelter or even housing and support services, we are those first responders to this issue and have been for years in working with folks on the street.
How old is the Fred Victor mission? How long have you been around?
We've been around for a little over 125 years.
Wow.
And we've been in we're across the city of Toronto now, but our original roots are in the downtown east area. We still operate out of the corner. We originally opened our building back in 1894 at Queen and Jarvis, and we are an agency that provides housing support services, mental health support, case management, as I mentioned earlier. We have a safe injection site. We also operate a respite emergency shelter, and recently we've expanded into operating or becoming an operator of one of the hotels as a response to the COVID piece.
If this happened in 1894, and I'm going to assume it's called the Fred Victor because it was Fred Victor who started it.
Fred Victor Massey, his family.
He was in 1894. This is a very enlightened human being.
Yeah, and this comes out of, I think, the movement at that time. There was, we have strong connections at that time, I think, with the Methodist Church, but it later became the United Church. And the Masseys, as probably most people know, are connected to the name. Industrialists in Toronto and in Canada, had a philanthropic part to the family, and wanted to give back and recognized the need of people living at that time in the downtown east. There was actually, they may have been the name of the organization, Fred Victor, but Mary Sheffield was probably the driving force behind the actual doing of the work. She ran the shelter at that time. Not that I like the term, but I guess it was the term back then, a soup kitchen, and that was specifically for those who were unemployed or homeless at that time in the downtown east. And we've carried that tradition of recognizing the need in our community and now recognizing the need across the city of Toronto to do something and be part of the solution to do something.
One of the things that surprised me, and I had never considered in all the reading I've been doing this morning, is that there are a percentage of people who are homeless who are asylum seekers, immigrants who come to Canada, fled their country, and they can't afford the rent, or they had a place and they lost it.
Yes.
I was wow, I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah, sadly there is a portion, particularly in the emergency shelter system, that are new to Canada and have fled various situations around the world. I do have to say, those who are in the shelter system or new Canadians to be honest, don't last long in the system itself. I don't have a particular stat, but they're not in it very long. We help and we move people along fairly quickly. We don't operate a specific refugee type of programming. I know there are other organizations that do, but our specialty, if you will, is really working with people who have been chronically homeless, those who have been marginalized in the past or currently, and in our shelter system, those who are directly on the street, to help them get off the street into a safe place, wrap services around them to the best of our ability, and hopefully move on through a lot of diligent work of our staff into a housing solution at the end of the day.
For a period of time several years ago, I worked with an outfit called Operation Go Home. They're out of Ottawa. I believe they might have an office here, but their goal was to get kids, teenagers, and if they could help them go home, they would help them. And if they couldn't help them go home, they'd help them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to Ottawa for a presentation, and they did a film, and it was just after Toronto had outlawed squeegee kids. And these 3 girls that were there that I'd met previously at another meeting came up to me and said, Dina, you've got to tell them. I said, tell them what? Because the kids can't do squeegee, they're turning to prostitution. Because you won't give them $1. They got to make money to eat. And I thought, when we pass these laws, we never think of the repercussions.
So those unintended consequences, that that's a good example of squeegee kids at that time. I think it was around Fred Victor at that time. And there's a level of creativity I think people have to survive. And unfortunately, when you kind of block, not you, but when the system and society blocks certain things, it either forces or tells people to go in a different direction, and sometimes that direction is not the best.
One of the things that Anthony Van Zandt, who I've worked with, and I don't know, do you know Anthony?
I don't. The name is familiar, but I don't.
He runs Street Souls, and in fact, Anthony had ended up in the street without going into his whole story, which I know. He was adopted, and at age 7, an uncle of the family or a cousin lived downstairs, and the guy did cocaine. But the kids would go down, and there'd be a little white stuff on the table, and he'd let them put their finger in it. So the kid ends up addicted on the streets. He cleaned up 10 or 11 years ago, and he stayed out there on the front lines ever since. And one of the things he mentioned that I actually got today was when I was talking to Zuna at Toronto was we need coordinated access and we need to align the process. And what Anthony used to say was when someone goes from a shelter, they need to be followed. So he goes from the shelter and we trace them to going to see this counselor. Then we know they go there so that we don't lose them somehow.
Yeah. And that's a very good point that you're making, and Anthony's observed and experienced probably, is that people do fall through the cracks. You look at the front line, a person goes into a shelter, it's shelter, it's 3 hours a day. But what's the other pieces of work that needs to be done? The housing coordination or housing advocacy to find housing. There may be medical or clinical services that need to be part of it, or mental health support. They all need to be working in relative lockstep with each other. And unfortunately, I think as systems have grown over the years, those silos have grown as well. And sometimes those systems are just not talking to each other or not communicating well.
Once I understood that point, I realized that the $2.2 billion that the federal government has put out is intending to do exactly that. We have to collect the information, we have to coordinate it, and we have to align everything. Are you hopeful? I mean, you've been working with the homeless for how long now? How many years personally?
It's probably since the mid-90s, yeah.
So do you feel we've got something going here, that they're going to get a handle on this thing?
I always like to be cautiously optimistic. I think there's commitment, at least from different orders of government, to put resources into it. And then there's a lot of expectation, I think, on agencies like Fred Victor and our other sister agencies to actually do some hard work around coordination of services, not let our egos get in the way of a better service outcome for clients. And the goal is not only the health of the individual, but the housing of the individual. And I'm kind of hopeful. I truly am. There's a need for new stock of housing in the system, absolutely. Yeah. But and that does take varying degrees of time to move forward. But I think there are ways in which we could work with the city, and the city, I think, is trying. How do you unlock existing units that may exist that are sitting empty? And some are, whether that's in the private sector or whether that's in say, Toronto Community Housing, for example. There may be units there that require a lot of repair, but they're not being occupied because of repair backlog. So
that's crazy in this time.
It is kind of crazy. So how do you unlock those? There's money to repair it, absolutely, but you can move people in fairly quickly on that. And I think there's also levels of support that have to be coordinated with that. I think that's part of the problem, or part of the challenge as well.
I also contacted, I've been a busy girl all morning. Chris Glover is the MPP for Spadina Fort York. And he started a homeless working group, which is going to be meeting next Monday, which I said, yeah, I'd like to sit in on it. Having moved back to Toronto, having gone like, what's going on here? And being annoyed and getting involved, the more I get involved, the more I want to stay involved and the more I want to know about it. But you're the man with the experience. I'm the newbie on the block. What percentage of homeless people are female as opposed to men? We always assume it's mostly men.
It is predominantly men, but I'm just trying to think of the latest stat, perhaps 25%, and the city might have a better handle on that because they look at the overall shelter rates. But I think it's 25% of those accessing emergency shelter, 25 to 30% are women, and that's in a couple thousand, if you will. But that doesn't even address or look at those who are avoiding the system altogether. Our friend Michael, he died on the street or in a bus shelter. Whether he was not part of a shelter, he was not registered, as far as I know.
He was.
He was at one point.
Yeah, he went into the St. Felix Center, and then I knew him when he was in the alley. I was part of the people that talked to people, and then he ended up in the St. Felix Center. And then I come out one day, and he's in the bus shelter. I said, Michael, what happened? And he said, they want me to take 3 showers a day or something. So I talked to Madison Purdue, who runs St. Felix, and in an email I said I understand it was a disagreement over the number of times he should shower, and she replied, obviously I can't tell you because of privacy. That wasn't the issue. The only thing I can tell you is that the information you have is wrong. But the point I've made to Anthony and to Madison, and I would make again, is I don't think you could have helped Michael at the point he was on. He had been on the streets for so long, and because of his mental issues. And my thinking is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the goal is to get people off the street and out of homelessness as fast as possible. The longer they're out there, the greater their chances of dying out there. That's
right. Absolutely. And I think the longer a person is on the street, or the longer the person is stuck in the shelter system too, it unfortunately, a person is likely to remain homeless or basically rotating in the shelter system. I don't have a particular stat, but I was always told that, if you can work with somebody, fairly quickly in a 3 to 4 or 6 month period to get them stabilized or get connected to clinical services if they need that, ID clinics, and connected to a housing plan, their likelihood to succeed is pretty high. The challenge at that point is there's not a lot of choice for affordable housing out there, or deep affordable housing. And oftentimes that choice is not the best choice. It could be a single room somewhere, or it could be in a place that a person may not want to go. That's if you're used to being in the downtown core for most of your street life, and the thought of moving to North York or Scarborough because it's slightly more affordable can be daunting in that. And also for a lot of folks, they have their routine, but they may have also set up their health service network, if you will. They may have a doc, or they go to a clinic in the downtown core, or that's easily available to them. So that access to housing is challenged both on an affordability base, but also on remaining close and connected to your service.
One of the things I learned that kind of surprised me is, and I can't remember which of the people I was talking to this morning, my assumption why people end up in the street was wrong. And I was told most of them lose their job. They lose the job, the money's gone, they can't pay their rent,
Mhm.
they don't have a choice now.
There's a significant, and when I say significant, I can't quote a percentage, but
Right.
you're absolutely right. There's an economic reason at the bottom here. There may not be a need for supportive services. It's just pure, unadulterated, I can't afford to live in this town. And I got evicted, or I couldn't pay my rent, or what have you, and they end up on the street. When we were first opening a respite, and I was a bit gobsmacked in a way. I always knew it was out there, but gobsmacked. The number of people who were living in their car, who would drive up to go to the respite, and they were living in their car at that point.
Wow.
And it is, I don't mean to be black and white about it. It is a bit of an economic issue that they can't afford. Even a bachelor that is running $1,000 a month at the best of times to afford that. That's 12 grand a year. If you're living on the edge, you lose your job, you're a couple months behind, and you're in the private sector, chances are your chances are pretty good that you might be evicted and out on the street.
The other
With
thing,
a lot of support.
the other thing people don't realize is when COVID hit,
Mm-hmm.
Michael had to move out of Farquhar's Lane because literally there are no washrooms for homeless people
Yes,
anywhere.
absolutely.
So Farquhar's Lane became the bathroom.
Yeah, and that is, it's just incredibly maddening and sad at the same time. When COVID started, and outside of food and food security and housing, just the basic dignity of where to go to go to the bathroom was lost on people who had built up a network of where they would go. They would hang out at Tim Hortons and for a couple hours here, have a coffee, or they go to McDonald's. And just thinking those in our particular immediate area in the downtown east, all those places closed their bathroom because they couldn't open, for one thing, and those things were gone. And we made do. We had a place to go home to, but if you're homeless,